And we're live.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Lisa.
Hey, Josh. Hello, everyone. Hope everyone's having a good Wednesday. It's the Dark Ozarks, and
It
we have
is.
a fun topic tonight.
Oh, I can't wait to make somebody angry. It is. We're going to be talking about the Ozark Howler. It is a
Yeah.
multifaceted thing. I was going to say cryptid, but at this point, it has broken the surly bonds of cryptozoology. It is the Howler is many things. It is the sign on the new motorbike course north of Branson. It is at least 2 beers in the Ozarks region, and it is something of which we get asked about often.
Yes, we do, and that's why we decided let's devote an entire episode. We generally talk about the Howler amongst a larger subject, but we'll do a deep dive into the Ozark Howler tonight.
We will, and I'll probably get myself in trouble because the Howler got up on its haunches probably about 15 years ago. I think the Howler finally, got an iMac and decent internet access and started emailing folks in Hollywood saying, I'm the Howler, you should write about me, and you should make TV shows about me, and you should do that over and over and over. And it's worked. My hat's off to him and his probably still dial-up connection in somewhere in the wilds of the mountains of the Ozarks. And here we are.
And here we are, but apparently he is a pretty good publicist for himself, because he went from pretty obscure lore to being everywhere and an amalgamation of various things. I think that's the one thing for me, and I think a lot of people don't realize that the iteration that they see right now about how he's depicted and what he supposedly is, it has changed considerably over time, and it's as bits and pieces are taken from here and there.
They are, and I'm excited to dig into that. The word that comes to mind to me is chimera.
Well, yeah, maybe literally. Let's that go down the ancient Greek rabbit hole there with chimeras, and you just don't know.
This chimera is hermetically sealed. Before we go any further, we have several events and an amazing sponsor to talk about.
Yes, we do. Let's see. Next time that people can come out and see us, at least that's scheduled right now, September 24th at the Bordertown Paracon in Katy, Kansas. Shout out to Bordertown Paranormal, who is putting it on. I've been before. They put on a good event. Come on out. Check their page for details. Josh and I will be speaking. Not sure on what yet, but
we'll figure it out. And you all, as the attending public, are welcome to throw us topic ideas to consider also.
Exactly. What are you interested in? Then October 15th, we have an all-day event, Dark Ozarks October Country, which will be held at the VFW Post 534 on Main Street in Joplin, Missouri, or just off Main Street, and which is sponsored by Always Buying Books, who also sponsors the video casts, and we are very appreciative to Bob and Elise for their support.
Yes, we are. Amazing location, great internet presence as well. You can order online, I believe, and certainly stop in the store. Bob has an amazing knack for curation.
He really does. They do a wonderful job. and from high-end items down to just genre reading, paperbacks, everything in between. And if you can't find something that you're interested in there, I'm not sure what to tell you.
I did.
You did find some, and actually one that I actually gotten from there, I'm going to be referencing later here. So
Very nice. Very, very nice. Great stuff. And then October 20th, the Old Joplin walking tour.
yes, downtown Joplin, we are doing that in conjunction with the Downtown Alliance, along with Third Thursday. And so we will be walking through downtown, talking about some of the unique history, ghost stories, etc. It's always a fun event, so come on out. Tickets are for both of those events are available at paranormalsciencelab.com. Then on October 29th, we will be at the Ritchie Mansion, as well as the Civil War Cemetery, Newtonia, Missouri, and event, excuse me, at the community center. So it will be a full evening, but every time we've done it, it's been great. And we are already selling tickets for that this early. So, and I'm getting buzz that people are excited. So check out the tickets because there is a limited number available.
That there are, and it's a great event. I love getting out to the Ritchie Mansion. So excited about all of these, and it's honestly a phenomenal way to celebrate our favorite season, which is the Halloween season.
Exactly. It's going to be fun.
Mm-hmm.
So where do you want to start with the Howler?
Oh, let's begin with the closest definition of what is an Ozark Howler.
Well, that's a broad roadmap.
Mm-hmm. I threw together some quick notes.
Mm-hmm.
To me, there's the Howler of the internet, and then there is the Howler of the pre-internet.
Yeah, let's start with the pre-internet, which is where the lore really started, and where if there's any whatever connection to reality there is would hopefully be found in that lore.
It is, and to such a large degree, not exclusively, but largely, we're dealing with something akin to a devil cat, a spectral hound, or in some cases, the idea of just a large panther.
Large panther, and then a lot of times it's also would be described as basically a bear with the horns and fangs even larger than a normal bear.
Yes.
So think of a bear jackalope.
Yes.
And and of course bear were fairly common in the early days in the Ozarks. So something along that lines is certainly possible. And it's ironic, of course, the jackalope is totally fictional and kitsch souvenir, but there actually is a fungus that jackrabbits get that grow and look like horns or protrusions off their head, and so that's probably where the idea for the jackalope came from. I don't know if it applies to other animals or not. So where the idea for the horns came from, I don't know.
I don't either, but to me, this is, I think it would be fair to place this in the category of regional chimera.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Well, and I think too, you have to look at the settlers coming in and lore that they were familiar with originally in the British Isles, particularly, and then further east coming this way, and then native lore. And I think I think it is a chimera of bits and pieces of that put together.
I tend to agree. There was a something number. Obviously, there is no shortage of really of websites and blogs devoted to the Ozark Howler at this point.
More than you really expect. I mean,
yes, you will not find multiple blogs dedicating themselves to the Jimplicute or even the Gowrow, and certainly not to the admittedly forlorn Side Hill Hoofer, which is my personal favorite, right next to the jackalope. But we don't seem to have jackalopes in the Ozarks. That seems to be a short grass prairie, tall Great Plains sort of critter. But that was this. I forgot completely where I was going, and on that, it sounded really good until we got there, and then I went, "Wait, where is here?" But you know, I think I would say there's a certain number of sites that are perpetuating the viral nature, the viral popularity of the idea. At this point, I would even go so far as to say that a number of these sites are simply perpetuating urban legend about the woods.
right, and kind of loosely around a very ephemeral, vague notion that there is this large, dangerous creature possibly out there. And the more shadowy and vague it is, the easier it is to perpetuate. And while it's, it's kind of like campfire stories at this point, and which is neat, and which has led to merchandising, which has its place. But if people are buying t-shirts and hats and beer, etc., thinking that this is what the story started out as, it's not.
It's not, and that's there are so many moving parts dealing. There's something I found interesting in our research for tonight's episode, that there are a handful of sites dedicated to the Ozark Howler that I actually really like.
Yeah, a couple of them I do. I mean, they're approaching it, trying to approach it in a more of a straightforward fashion, and not making it shtick.
And also seem to be a counter response to the more superficial urban legend aspect. The idea that this out here has been placed and has been said. Now we're presenting essentially the counter argument of the Howler, and making
Right.
some positive references that, just to give people something to consider as the Howler moved. I think from I think that there's this is probably going to result in a diagram, but this one's going to have circles. Circles. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be great, folks.
Really, maybe it's a geometry problem.
Fortunately, no trigonometry. That certainly we have what I would classify as European lore, Native American lore, and both of those into a fusion of what I think we could loosely call settler lore. That the settlers came together and actually started creating their own work. Out of that, we have the development of tall tales.
That was about what I was going to say, is that it has to be looked at through the lens of the Ozarks as tall tales, because we have that tradition, and the reason for the tradition is to separate the outsiders, the flatlanders, from the locals. And it's a tradition that is used to size people up and see how gullible they are.
It is, which makes, which I think it's important to place a bit of a cautionary note on this, is don't get suckered in by all the stories.
Exactly. You know, if it's too good to be true or too fantastical, it probably is. I mean, and that's sort of that's the moral lesson of the tall tale tradition. You know?
And I'm not entirely sure. I think I'm actually sketching out the Kabbalah tree of life. See?
Either that or some sort of, I don't know, new chemical.
It's a stick man with mittens for hands. And
You have horns.
oh, I'll add in horns. Don't worry. Don't you all worry. I'll add in horns. And we also have and I would say, I think from a socio-cultural standpoint, that there's a difference between online urban legend and campfire tales.
Oh, yes, definitely. And campfire tales, you know, often will have a grain of truth to them, and they're done as cautionary tales, but in a little different vein of with the purpose of giving a lesson for surviving either the wilderness or life or whatever, whereas internet urban legends just kind of go off on a tangent of their own.
They do, and I would say that the urban legend aspect has perpetuated a good chunk of the merchandising.
Yeah, I think so. I do think so. I think one aspect of sort of the original lore that I think is sort of that grounding element, that sense of grain of truth for me is the howl itself. That, you know, it has a cry that, you know, variously has been over time described as a wolf or even an elk bugle, or a big cat, almost sounding like a ethereal human voice. A lot of more modern takes on trying to determine, well, what is it that could be making this noise? People tend to point to red foxes now, which,
Yes,
and they do have a crying sound that often can sound like a woman or a child.
they do. I heard red fox one spring when I was a child, and I think as we as a society have moved further and further away from connecting, not just connecting with the land in terms of agriculture, but connecting with the wilds, connecting with the forest in a meaningful way, that, you know, so some of the reports in regards to the howl of the Ozark Howler, saying, you know, it filled me with a sense of dread. It sounded unearthly. This was really, really terrifying. And then making an admittedly faulty leap of logic to say, what else could it have been but the Ozark Howler? I'm sitting there going, you've never heard a panther before, have you?
Yeah, and that was the next thing. It also, I mean, the descriptions are also very much like a big cat.
Yeah.
And I mean, dare we tread into that morass? But you know, yes, there are bobcats. And then there's the question of, you know, mountain lions. And
Yes.
I think it's fair to say there are some, if for some still around, if for no other reason, pets that have been let go and things like that, because that has been documented in the region.
It has,
So
and while it is its own subject, it is valid. There is a strong inclination that the howler is feline.
it is, and I find it really interesting because the real early stories make it seem more bear or canine, but it has sort of morphed to feline, and it seems to me that if it is a real creature, it probably is feline.
Yes. And that, of course, comes back to the concept of the devil cat. My diagram is done.
Very neat. It's even
And
3D.
it
Even his
is.
step.
I'll animate it later.
Please do.
But just, I swear I've only had caffeine today. But it's been a big day. But this is what, so this is the layout of my flowchart based on our conversation. Then we'll just start picking things and then going from there. Now that I have a map, as everyone knows, I can't do anything until I have a map. At the base,
I can vouch for that.
I know. Very true. At the base, we have European lore and Native American lore feeding into the creation, the fusion of settler lore, which certainly would have begun here in the Ozarks around the 1820s.
Yeah, I mean, there were a few people coming in to the Ozarks earlier than that, but
there
really,
were,
for any practical numbers, the 1820s.
Yeah, and if you want, I mean, if you want to get nitpicky, obviously the late 1700s, certainly, especially in terms of French influence, French lore, and then U.S. settlers, white settlers coming across from Illinois into the far eastern portions of the Ozarks, and then out of that, and I think to a certain degree, you can, from a psychological and from a sociological standpoint, you can place yourself in that space of the settlers. They're coming into what is honestly a very terrifying land with no backup, no infrastructure, no 911, no anything, and obviously many of the folks who were settling in the wilderness were accustomed to some degree of wilderness. They had been, in many cases, settling across the then Western United States, Kentucky, Indiana, Ohio, Illinois. But anyone who thinks that wasn't easy, or even wouldn't play with your mind, I would encourage them to go out, like, into a glade, onto a mountaintop, get rid, leave your cell phone, basically leave all of your tech behind, and go out there at night and just sit there.
Well, I think there's a good illustration of that in a recent post on the page, if anyone wants to go read it, about the steamboat Comet reaching the Arkansas Post in 1820.
Yes.
And there's some pretty good description in there about how hard it was to travel. And in fact, that year, that summer, to ride between the Arkansas Post and Little Rock, which were two of the very few settlements in territorial Arkansas at the time, they had to ride at full speed the entire way because the horseflies were so bad that they would be overcome if they were not riding at full speed.
Wow. I believe it. So, and it was in many ways, I mean, obviously it was untamed, it was beautiful land, but it was also terrifying in terms of what folks were up against and the level of effort. So I think that the legends, the lore, which have an extraordinary history of meaning, that, you know, going back to the old world, having those stories ingrained, and those what I would classify as hearthside stories,
Mhm.
told generation after generation to provide a variety of complex senses of meaning in a very unsteady and very violent world.
Very much so. Yeah.
Those elements, and then combining with two things, certainly native lore. Oh, I'm going to add something. And native lore, yeah. But also a completely new environment. This was not these were not the animals of Europe. This was not the land structures of Europe.
Or necessarily even further east, if they had been on the East Coast for a generation or two.
Yes. And you know, that this was just so new. So all of this coming together to say, let's, and I think even then, a certain amount of levity being injected into the stories. Let's make this funny, let's make this scary. This is part of our entertainment. This is how we're gonna scare the kids or entertain the kids. But
yeah,
also,
there was not 24-hour entertainment with TV or the internet or anything. You know, I think that a lot of people would have a hard time conceptualizing the lengths that people would go to for levity and entertainment.
I agree. But it is uniquely rich, and something that became in this particular fusion of settler lore uniquely entertain, or uniquely American, uniquely North
Yes.
American, and a really important tapestry or fabric of lore was created out of this in various regions. And we see, you know, some of the more long time nationally known icons, Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox, come to mind, that these are unique American icons of lore. And I think that what we see in terms of then transitioning to tall tales is, say, a generation or two later, these are stories, for example, stories that grandpa told, or stories that great grandpa told. But now the people telling them have the Ozarks may be a rough place to survive. They always have been, in terms of subsistence living and farming and agriculture, in so many ways. But at this point, you have folks who now, they're no longer settlers, they're Ozarkers, and these are their stories.
Right.
And that, I think, is where we really start to see the us and them. We're going to tell these tall tales. We're going to tell them with a straight face, and we're going to tell them to the newcomers. We're going to tell them to the tourists. We're going to tell them to the Flatlander yahoos who wandered in from somewhere, and we're going to see just how far, how much they'll buy it.
Yeah. How far can we go?
Yeah.
No, I do think that is exactly what happened, and then the description of the howler changed as you get into that, as we go further in time, where before
Yes.
it is, you know, very much where it seems to be a creature on all fours, hulking, you know, either large bear, canine, or feline. And then over time, it becomes something that, you know, sometimes is depicted as bipedal. It's more, is it a little bit more like Bigfoot? Is it, you know, what is it, you know? And in some ways it becomes a caricature, which is literally what's been used for merchandising. But but that has changed, and in part probably because of the rise of lore of other creatures like Sasquatch, skunk ape, things like that. The blue man in the Ozarks. It's what I find interesting is for Ozarkers, there's a clear line between the howler and the blue man.
Oh, absolutely. Or the Momo.
Or the Momo, yeah. But
Yeah.
specifically, I'm thinking the blue man because they're really more in the same geographical area.
Yes.
Momo's a little further north, up by Louisiana. And so, so when you start getting these depictions and these reiterations of a howler, it starts sounding more like a Sasquatch. But it's like, no, we have the blue man and we have the howler, never the twain shall meet.
Yes. And
I'm not really sure why on that one.
I know. I think that from the Tall Tales, I think a major injection of content from the Tall Tales, and you see this, what I would classify as an early step of modernity, where we're stepping away, we're using the base of your traditional Celtic and Anglo-Saxon lore predominantly, not exclusively, but predominantly, and we're stepping into a modernity in a sense, but modernity filtered through 1890s to 1930s era Ozarks, in terms of let's make up stories and see how far we can take it. And I find this, the idea is that if you're, say, like, to give people an idea of the sense, it's an insider test. If you're, say, like 4 or 5 years old and an Ozarker, you get it. Or you might be fooled when you're a kid, but you rapidly learn as an adult. But then you watch the smart people with the big cars and the money and the image of success and intelligence in modern America coming, and then falling for something that in your family only a little kid would fall for.
Yeah. And we've seen we've seen that with TV producers too, specifically.
Yes. Yes, we have. and they're
leave it at that.
And Beverly Hillbillies in reverse, boys and girls. And I think really at that tall tale portion where you have, in this case now, grandpa who's second or third generation from early settlement,
right,
who in all reality is quite well educated, has gone to a rigorous in this case high school, in which he may honestly have studied Latin in 1910. That was not,
well, yeah, I think people often forget that at that time, if a high school education is pretty much the equivalent of at least a bachelor's, if not a master's at this point.
Agreed. And some folks stumble at that reality, but it is the reality. It is documentably the reality. And the idea that during high school or even prior, you could be studying the Greek classics, you could be reading Ovid, you could be quite familiar with Greco-Roman mythology and the Chimera.
My dad had 4 years of Latin in high school and had to read the Gallic Wars in Latin. So.
Documentably.
Yes.
Documentably. And these are the folks that the Yahoo tourists are coming in and calling uneducated hillbillies.
Exactly. And my dad loved to play with that.
Which is a pretty beautiful thing. And it really speaks to that multi-layered complexity of the Ozarks.
Yes.
And I think that is where we really begin to see the inclusion or the infusion of regional chimera and instead of taking Asian or African beasts and combining them, instead we're seeing the combination of American, either large American, basically apex predators or large animals. You know, the idea, the bear, essentially bear, panther, and bison seem to be the three animals, which of course all of them are very notable in their own right, and very and I would say and also wolf, and it if my working theory here is correct, we see this in the likely developing in the 1910s to the 1930s, and this was an era admittedly of poor conservation in terms of animals, and we were seeing a situation in which animals were being hunted out of existence in so many regions.
They were, and well, and I guess another animal too is, you know, when we mentioned that they describe as the elk bugle
Yes.
cry, is that in early settlement times, their elk was indigenous to the northern Ozarks.
Yes, and I find that so we've got bear, panther, bison, wolf, and elk. All of these are animals that would have figured very predominantly during first and second generation settlement. These are also animals that were either hunted into regional extinction, obviously not full extinction because many of these been reintroduced, but into regional extinction by the 1920s and 1930s. It reminds me, just very briefly, I'm going to go off on a family story aside. My grandpa in southern Iowa was a farmer. He was a farmer, a cowboy, and a union carpenter in that order, in order to do whatever was necessary to take care of his family. He's 70 years old when I was born, and he's one of my heroes. And one of my heroes in the sense also that he is a very imperfect hero, and I prefer imperfect heroes because you just there's this sense of reality. I also inherited a lot from him, so you know his imperfections are usually mine. That said, in the 1940s, so I'll back up. Grandpa understood, you know, that there was a savage balance of reality, that you know, if something is killing your livestock, you have to stop it, so on and so forth. And you know, he was very much a realist, very much a pragmatist, but he also really loved animals. He loved his horses. He loved his dogs. He had a huge soft spot in his heart for animals, which he usually did a reasonably decent job of covering up. And there was, and my mom remembers this. This would have been
well describing my dad too. So
he, it was in the 1940s, and because my mom did remember this, and there was a lone wolf that had migrated into the immediate area, and it incited a panic.
Sure.
And a hunting party was organized to stop the wolf before it did all of these terrible things. And my grandpa got between the wolf and the hunting party and told him to go stick it. But that, look by, and from his experience, etc., in terms of the regional wolf population of what he had been familiar with, he said that one wolf ain't gonna do nothing that's gonna make any difference. You leave him the hell alone.
Yeah.
And I grew up with that story, and I think that those those conflicts, those conflicts of psyche,
Mhm.
really figure into this era of tall tales and regional chimeras,
I
in
think
the sense
so.
that we're dealing with animals that in some cases had become recently extinct, or regionally. I keep
Yeah,
saying
we're
regionally.
just pushed out of the region.
Yes, but still inhabiting a place in the minds of the psyche, either a sense of melancholy over something having been lost,
Mhm.
or a what I would classify as a knee-jerk reaction, a sense of fear,
Fear
that this is terrifying.
and just nostalgia too for old stories.
Yes, and and I'm going to then rebalance this. Some of these animals, we look at the cougar population.
Mhm.
Cougars are apex predators who feed regularly. They hunt intelligently, and in many cases, and we keep getting report after report in rural Missouri,
Mhm.
that this is a serious, in various regions or in situations, have become a serious threat,
Mhm.
and that has to be balanced one side with the other. It's not all touchy feely. It's very complex.
Mhm.
So
I think it's also you have to look at that time period that um we start, you know, I think howler is probably the original term because they were describing something that was howling.
yeah,
Um, then
100%.
yeah, and then they in the 30s we start using the term hoo-hoo regularly from Randolph. Um,
The
and
concatenated hoo hoo.
huh?
The concatenated hoo hoo.
And and here's the thing about that is that what I find amusing is people have taken that and ran with it being something with the being connected to the howler, and it's not. Um, the International Order of Continental Hoo-Hoo, uh, it was they originally were formed in Gordon, Arkansas. However, it's a lumber industry organization, and hoo-hoo was a term for a lumberman.
Oh my gosh.
And so they're still in existence. They have chapters every, on like 5 continents in New Zealand, etc. And but because they have that in the name, and then you have these tales of the howler being called the hoo-hoo, and I was thinking earlier today about that. My guess is the conflagration of the two may be because maybe lumbermen were reporting hearing howling, these howling animals, just like lumbermen were the original reporters of Tales of the Blue Man.
Exactly what I was thinking, up
Yeah.
in the central Missouri Ozarks. Yeah, I
So
think that I think there has to, it doesn't have to be, but I think that it's quite realistic to see a very unique um, point of intersection of those elements coming together to create nomenclature, and to create unique American lore
mhm.
that then begins to take on a life of its own. But we don't know, in many cases, when you're the recipient of the lore, you don't know the origin of the lore.
That's very true, and I think that's what's happened here. And now the internet has stepped in and made a conspiracy involving Teddy Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt and the Ozark Howler.
Yes, and the reports go like this: that Teddy Roosevelt was introduced to the howler by way of John C. Greenway, who was also in the Rough Riders.
Yes.
Now, Greenway went on, by the way, he was in the lumber industry. But he originally was from Alabama. His family did move to the Hot Springs area for about 2 years when he was in grade school age, and then moved away. So he may have heard some sort of tales about the Howler. But the conspiracy theory goes that he told tales to Teddy Roosevelt, and Teddy was so enamored with this tale of the Howler that he then came to Hot Springs in 1905 and met with the Order of the Hoo-Hoo.
Yes.
Now there's a couple of and then that led to their influence is what precipitated him to declare the first national forest in the Ozark region. Now then, there are a couple of problems. One, they weren't in Hot Springs; they were formed in Gurdon in 1909, after the national forest was established. So, but we digress. But
Small details.
And
Small details.
the other issue I have is I think that if Teddy Roosevelt had heard this and was interested by it, he would have ended up writing about it, because he did do that in
Yes.
another case.
Yes.
And this took place out in Montana, and it was a tale conveyed to him by a hunting guide. The hunting guide's name was Bauman, and they were out in the wilds, and they heard the call of a creature. And Bauman recalled his experience from 40 years earlier, and it impressed Roosevelt enough that he wrote about it actually in his book, The Wilderness Hunter.
Yes.
Ironically, now he did not describe, he nor Bauman, either one, described the creature, quote, as a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch. And actually, and I don't think Bauman really gave it a name of sorts, but what Roosevelt described it was as Bauman's goblin story. He writes, frontiersmen are not, as a rule, apt to be very superstitious. They lead lives too hard and practical and have too little imagination in things spiritual and supernatural. But I once listened to a goblin story, which rather impressed me. And he goes on to say, it was told by a grizzled, weather-beaten old mountain hunter named Bauman, who was born and had passed all his life on the frontier. He must have believed what he said, for he could hardly repress a shudder at certain points of the tale. But he was of German ancestry, and in childhood had doubtless been saturated with all kinds of ghost and goblin lore. So that many fearsome superstitions were latent in his mind. Besides, he knew well the stories told by the Indian medicine men in their winter camps of the snow walkers, the specters, the formless evil beings that haunt the forest depths and dog and waylay the lonely wanderer. Then goes on to tell the tale that Bauman recanted of he and a partner fur trapping 40 years earlier and being tracked and hunted by this beast who would come into their camp silently. They wouldn't see it. There would be tree knocks and howls, calls. And what precipitated the telling of the story was they were sitting around the campfire and they heard this call. And it was nothing that any of the men had heard before, but Bauman, Roosevelt says that Bauman blanched white and said he had heard it before and never forgot it. And ultimately in the story that his hunting partner, his trapping partner, was killed by this beast.
Yeah.
And so in fact, Roosevelt devotes about 6 pages to the telling of the story. So I think that if he had heard this from Greenway and was that impressed, he probably would have set it down at some point in writing.
I agree, and I know it's been a long time. You and I have talked about that story, but I had forgotten it, and it gives me chills just in the retelling.
Yes, yeah, actually, we may have to do an article going in depth and talking about the interplay with that and the Howler story, but it's a very chilling account, and it definitely made an impression on Roosevelt. And he concluded, I don't know what it was, but it was obvious that something had happened, and he believed that Bauman believed everything he said.
Yes, and I think that is, we recognize this is recorded anecdotal information.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think that record stands as something incredibly important to take into serious thought and study.
I think so, but I think and I do have to wonder if at some point when someone came up with this Roosevelt and the Ozark Hoo story, that they weren't borrowing from the Bauman story.
It certainly is possible. I think, like in terms of, to me, an outgrowth of these tall tales has resulted in some things that we've certainly already talked about. The fact that it may be simply referencing existing animals, or quote unquote animals out of place.
Right.
An animal that you say shouldn't be there, but it is not a fantastical animal. It is not a cryptid. It's a fully recognized, for example, mountain lion or bison or elk before the repopulation, or bear before the repopulation, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And I do think, those tales, people were experiencing something, that
Yes.
large creature making those kind of howls and so forth. But I do think in the internet age, now we have this perpetuation of the urban legend, and now we're trying to, it seems almost like with this conspiracy theory, we're trying to substantiate it. It must be true. There must be something to it, and giving it credibility by tying it to Teddy Roosevelt.
I agree, and I think that there's a very unique, from an informational standpoint, a superficial and, dare I say, plagiaristic or incestual information point between urban legend, cryptozoology, and essentially the mass marketing side of it.
Yes, I agree with you there.
And that tends to, sometimes it will dip into bits and pieces of the past to substantiate its own claims. But those three of mass marketing, urban legend, and cryptozoology seem to be feeding off of each other in what I would classify as superficial, or self-aggrandizing. And if you, I won't go as far to say that that is good or that is bad. It simply is. But it, depending on if that isn't your thing, then I would encourage people to look at all of these other sociological, historical contexts and situations that are leading to it. Because now I will say that the urban legend aspect leading to the internet has created an enormous amount of fan art for the Ozark Howler that is quite fascinating. I would love to have the same amount of art for the Snoffus as we have for the Howler.
Yes. I agree.
And for people, and this, I think this is a perfect example, in terms of Ozark tall tales, and we're talking, I would say roughly 1920s at the earliest into the 1960s, and the Ozarks is kind of where I would consider the compendium of Ozark tall tales to have hit. And interestingly enough, that is also the time in which we see it's essentially the rise and fall of the Chambers of Commerce booster campaign, Land of a Million Smiles, in which you are now forcibly injecting rich urban tourists into the Ozarks.
Yeah.
That you have the Howler and the Snoffus, the Gowrow, and the Jimply-Cute. The Snoffus, and I think this is interesting, everybody has an idea. For example, I know what the Howler is, even if they don't, or if they see something that they don't know what is, then it is certainly first on the list to check off the box to say maybe it was the Howler.
Yeah.
But nobody is ascribing this to the Snoffus. Now, I think perhaps the Howler, because it is at this point a regional chimera, potentially made up of bear, panther, bison, wolf, and elk, that it could be so many things. It's vague enough that if you don't know what it is that you saw, it fits.
It fits. Or maybe you didn't see anything clearly. Maybe just you saw maybe a shout, or maybe you just heard it. Maybe you just heard the cries.
Yes, and we see that. I will say, well, we'll get the other side throwing things at me. But when we talk about the potentialities, my little Kushi possibly needs to go do something. He'll be back, but and I've been so looking for. Okay, so I need to say something to get people angry at me. That's what I need to do. Is we talk about Black Panthers, and a number of people will say, yes, Black Panthers exist because I've heard them.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, how do you know what color they were if you only heard them? That's not disputing recognizing a panther call, or technically a mountain lion. That's not disputing an animal, quote unquote, out of place. That there were, for example, mountain lions where certain authoritarian figures have said, no, they're not mountain lions there. That is one argument. But I think I would encourage people to think it through just a little bit. If you say, I know there was a Black Panther out there because I heard it, but I didn't see it, you're not helping the case. So
no, because that goes back to, red fox can sound a lot like that. A bobcat can sound a lot like that. An owl.
There's a lot.
Owls can sound a lot like big cat.
They can. It's very interesting. I always loved owls. But the other thing is, and this I think goes a long way in doing. The Howler's got some splaining to do, and fortunately, it seems to be doing that tonight. Is that the Howler is a chimera-like amalgamation of so many different things that when one experiences something that one doesn't know what it is, or begins to question what exactly has happened that I've just experienced, and that's a real thing.
It is a real thing, and I think that's also, there's been, as you said earlier, a number of TV shows and documentaries, exploring the idea of the Howler, and sometimes they'll hear something, and that's usually where it goes, is that they hear something howling or a cry, and again, yes, you heard something. What it was, maybe something totally different than your envisioning the idea of the howler.
And I think that also it makes for an interesting cryptozoological hunt,
Yes.
because you go out into the forest, you go out into the dark wilds of the Ozarks, and you hear something at night howling. And you could easily then say, particularly if you're unaccustomed to the Ozarks at night, I heard the howler. I was in the Ozarks. I heard something howl.
It must be that.
It must be that. No, it could be about 6 perfectly normal things before it's an amalgamation beast. But
Speaking of amalgamation or chimera, there's
yeah,
also another theory that seems to be floating more recently, particularly by writer Ralph Toller. Do you want to address that?
I'll let you intro it.
Oh,
I'm gonna write down amalgamation beast.
we may have to use that as a title sometime.
I like it. By the way, I love where this is going. I know where you're going with this.
So for everybody, so this is sort of where we've gotten, and in the last 10 years, we've been besieged with Teddy Roosevelt conspiracies, and now another tangent that yes, we do have a chimera, that the howler is an American satyr,
Yes,
maybe Krampus.
and could be Krampus.
Yeah, I guess if he's from Greece or Germany, I guess it just how far south does his lineage go? I don't know. I'm sorry.
It's a deep South Krampus, and I think it's the horns.
Yeah.
I think that is where this begins. Obviously, we have shifted from beast, quote unquote, i.e., on all fours,
Right.
and
Yeah, that's true.
to something that is bipedal, something that approximates a human figure. And
yeah, I think unspoken. I think people are wanting it to be a Bigfoot, and of course, I mean,
yes,
it's in that iteration is a little similar to Goatman tales and
this is true.
in the
This
Western Ozarks,
had not thought about that.
except for they usually exhibit the howler with just straight horns or more like short cattle horns. Actually, one and we hadn't talked about the Celtic lore yet, but one thing that went through my head is that some of the early descriptions, the shaggy lumbering beast with short horns makes me think of Highland cattle.
This is true. This is true. The coos, not to be confused with the Kushi. That is interesting. It really is, because with the exception of bison, well, and to some degree bear,
Mm-hmm.
we're not really dealing with shagginess.
No, but especially when you're talking about shaggy. I mean, bison, they a bit, but it's curly. Their fur is curly and tightly curled, and and the description of the razor sharp, the short, flat horns and shaggy fur lumbering beast, it does call to mind Highland cattle, which Scotch Irish would be familiar with.
They would.
And then, of course, I mean, and then there are some who, do sort of relate this a little bit, to more Celtic lore, but
True. Which
satyr, yeah, I'm not quite there.
I mean,
I'll let you address whether or not we have an Ozark Krampus. So since that is your favorite.
Oh my gosh, I know. So I'm generally assuming everybody knows what Krampus is, but in case they don't, Krampus is Alpine, Austrian, and German lore of a winter demon that steals children. It is notable for having horns, a long tongue, and wrapping itself in chains, in which it uses to bind the children and pack them off to hell if they're bad. It is, some people call it the evil Santa Claus. I think that's a little bit of a stretch. Obviously, this is a pre-Christian lore that was very, very important. It holds a lot of resonance in terms of both winter solstice and as well as fertility rite, core values, I suppose, for pre-Christian Europe, and it also really explores the darkness and threat of that region in a pre-industrialized era when winter was deadly. And and I do think that it explores a concept of European culture that has been largely relegated to an undercurrent of European culture, which is similar to the Taoist idea of yin and yang, that there's not that you don't align yourself with simply the good. You understand that within us, within nature, within the universe around us, there is good and bad in competition with one another, and a certain amount of acceptance of the inner darkness and the outer danger leads us potentially to the development of what could be classified as more healthy human psyche, a more healthy human psyche, a more healthy development of human psyche that isn't so off balance. You actually use the realities of darkness, the realities of night, the realities of a dark season versus a light season, the realities of the dark times of our own soul. By accepting those, it allows us to create a healthy bulwark to find psychological, emotional, spiritual balance. That said, is the Ozark Howler actually Krampus? Yeah, probably not.
Yeah, I think we can probably cross Seder and Krampus off the list.
And for personal reasons, i.e. my novel, Plague Child's Doctor, I love the idea of a Seder in the Ozarks. I wrote one.
Well, but that's a different that's a different tale.
It is. Mikhail
you all should check out Plague Child's Doctor.
Thank you.
Just good.
Oh, really quickly, we will be at the Metaphysical Fair at the Republic Events Center this weekend.
That's right.
With
Friday,
books.
Saturday, Sunday, and with books. We will both have books. We're not always good about having books with us,
but we will have books with us, and I'll bring Francesca the cow skull for everyone to see, and also we'll be bringing Sky.
Yes, cool.
I have permission from the event coordinators.
Cool.
To bring my new puppy, and
I wondered.
Very, very excited. I'll actually be helping do some setup there tomorrow. So
okay.
I figure, well, for you all who are accustomed to checking out Dark Ozarks, plan on catching. We'll be doing lives from the event.
Definitely.
Lots and lots of fun. And coming back, I really think the Howler gets neatly tucked into the category of cryptozoology. I want to put my disclaimer out here. I study cryptozoology. I respect cryptozoology.
I do too.
This is not something that I'm going to mock or make fun of or say that it's a pseudoscience. That in any of these cases, cryptozoology UFO experiences and the paranormal, we rarely, if we knew what it was we were experiencing, it would no longer be in any of those categories.
Right.
We don't know, but what we do know, and you have had experiences, I have had experiences, we have talked to countless people who have had experiences. Our senses are not always lying, and they're not always lying. People experience things in these three categories: cryptids, UFOs, and the paranormal, that defy the admittedly small cubicle in which modern sensibility places all of its categories. So I have a deep and abiding respect for cryptozoology. That said, I think that it is of the many critters of the tall tales category, I think that Ozark Howler fits poorly into cryptozoology.
I do too. I think I fall on the side of the fence of there people have had experiences of animals that they did not identify correctly or could not because they couldn't see them, etc. And it could have been different animals at different times, particularly over a long period of time.
Yeah.
And because, I mean, we don't exactly, it's not that we have a catalog of howler calls to say that's a howler call and that's something else.
I'm imagining like the 1970s big record of birdsong calls you could buy.
I shouldn't have said that. Someone will probably try to produce one for the howler. So I come down, that I think we had these experiences, and those are real experiences that people had with some sort of animal.
Yes.
Then the other side of it is tall tales and folklore. And we've covered a lot of this with the tall tales, as well as settler lore, etc. What's your thought on the role of old world?
The old world influences.
Uh-huh.
Oh,
Hey, Sky.
well, I think my puppy has you got dirt on you, an impeccable sense of timing, because I have my very own my very own cool she. He's fearsome, isn't he? He's an
Yes.
omen of death. He is my my fierce omen of death from the Scottish Highlands, and he's a little feisty because he's been sleeping for hours. It is so, as we've been talking, well, my first disclaimer on this is I will under no circumstances ever pass up the opportunity to talk about Welsh or Scottish lore, particularly in terms of animals and death omens, because oh my gosh, it is so incredibly cool.
Same.
That said, the more that we have studied this, the more that I think it gets difficult to draw a straight line between the Kuananun or the Kushi to the Ozark Howler.
Right.
And I think that and actually, and I do want to talk about both of those because I think they're incredible. But in both cases, we're dealing with something that it is spectral or fey, and it is canine.
Yes.
That there's no amalgamation. This isn't one part one thing, one part another.
Or even questioning whether it is. It's not even is it or isn't, or could it be? It's very clearly canine.
Yes, the idea that it's a dog. But it is more than a dog out of place. This is a dog that sends shivers up your spine. This is a dog you do not want to ever see. And that, I think, is, there's such a haunting quality to that is really, really fascinating. Really fascinating.
But for me, there's better analogies to lore in the Ozarks for them, and those
Yes.
be phantom hounds and so forth.
Yes, we've got phantom hounds, and even though it's a different animal, the black boar is the same story. It is the same quality. It is a spectral animal that there's no question about what animal it is. We're not dealing with a chimera in a combination animal, which I think we really see the combination animals with the tall tales. We're mixing animals together to make it more interesting, as opposed to a long background history. Yes, we have a fearsome hound of Ulster. He is. I don't know if I shall triumph over him. I may not, actually. He does like to try and chew my face off. I'm not looking. But I think as a real quick point of comparison, I've got like four things and a dog in my head right at the moment. But the Snoffus, I'm going to jump back to the Snoffus for just a moment. I think one of the reasons that the Howler, he's providing sound effects, he's howling. One of the reasons that at least he's not in barking at his reflection in the refrigerator, and I have to go get him this time. Yes. He's a simple sort, but he's a lot of fun. That one of the reasons that the Howler, I believe, has taken on a life of its own is because it could be so many things at once. It is actually very vague in its precise description. The Snoffus, on the other hand, is impossible to mistake for something else. It is a white deer that has wings, and instead of antlers, it has dogwood blossoms, dogwood branches that are blossoming, and it lives in treetops and snorts at inappropriate times in order to scare lumbermen.
See, the lumberman
We're back to the concatenated who.
That's right.
And certainly within the tall tale category, it is interesting because there's no source citations necessary, and so almost anything that one says can be the thing that it is, which I really had way too much fun last night online by creating the Texie Hoo Hoo, which could be anything. And also, as is appropriate in a tall tale, silly. And not only could it be anything, but how do you prove that it's not anything?
Exactly, and that's kind of where things have come down on this, I think. So for Celtic lore, I think there are better analogies, and we've dealt with those in other episodes, and we probably will again.
One real quick, I just want to throw this in here, which I think actually seems to have a little bit more in terms of a connection with European lore to settler lore to the Howler, is the devil cat or the witch cat.
Yes. Now I am intrigued there.
Yes.
But again, big cats are something that were known in early days here. Catamounts was another name that they went by for the settlers. They would call them catamounts.
Yes.
Don't ask me why, but so there were various names given for big cats, and so and they were, to be honest, they probably were the most dangerous predator for settlers.
I think so. I think that's very fair. And of course, we're largely insulated from those kind of dangers.
Yeah.
So it's easy to discount that. But, for example, mountain lions, first of
Mhm.
all, are large apex predator, large, highly intelligent apex predators, and they typically will hunt by, a mountain lion can kill a horse, and
Well, in fact, if we discussed when we were talking about Crowley's Ridge, that when the Crowleys first settled the Ridge, that Mr. Crowley's favorite horse was killed by a mountain lion in the barn.
yes,
So
and
it was very real danger.
and a very common um mm, predatorial attack is to wait in the trees
Mhm.
at night, and for example, when the horse or deer pass over, the mountain lion lunges and bites through the spine at the back of the
Right.
neck.
Jumps
That
on their
and
back.
that's the goal. That's the attack. You mentioned the horse flies. We're dealing with an area, a region that had not seen human population for quite some time.
Mhm.
That basically the animals were, um, in great number.
Mhm.
Clouds of horseflies, for example, large. I think it's fair to say large numbers of cougars during that time, mountain lions,
Mhm.
and that. So, for example, if the mountain lion is hunting a horse and is leaping from behind at night with an attempt to sever the horse's neck, and the horse has a rider, you do the
Exactly.
geometry, you do the dynamic, the physics on that.
Exactly. Plus, it would be very easy, particularly in the dark, to, depending on your angle, see claws or whatever, and think they're horns, perhaps.
I think it's possible, or the ears, or I mean,
Ears, yeah.
honestly, an 85 to 95 pound cat that is all teeth and claws leaping at you in the dark of night from behind
Terrifying.
while you're on a horse is absolutely terrifying and could easily kill someone.
Yes, easily could.
And and
So
and,
I
and I
could
think
see that. I could see the idea of the horns and so forth coming from that kind of situation. What are your thoughts on the sort of the concept of the devil cat?
well, I think it's fascinating. Obviously, we have it has a strong shifter and witch lore attached to it.
Yeah.
I think a good portion in this particular case, a good portion of this is coming from European lore about witches,
Mhm.
the association of witches with cats,
Mhm.
obviously, the association of witches able to change, to shapeshift
Mhm.
into other animals, predominantly a cat, for nefarious or outside of standard societal purposes.
True. Plus, native lore often involved witches that were shifters.
It does, and we're dealing with a region that has, and perhaps this is something that really has led to so much unique Ozarks folklore, is that the Ozarks are have been a relatively isolated region that at the same time is populated by Scots, Irish, and Cherokee.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people kind of have a misconception because uh, those populations are centered in Oklahoma now,
Mhm.
that but in the late 1700s and early 1800s, most of Arkansas was Cherokee and Osage. And so, and they have a very strong shifter lore and with their witchcraft.
They
So,
do.
I mean, that does make sense to me. In fact, the same account, that article that we posted on the page this week, to give an idea, it's 1820, and there was a missionary trying to, he's in Pleasant Hills, Mississippi, which is now Vicksburg. It was what Vicksburg was previously. And he's trying to find information about going to Arkansas, to Cherokee country, and he could only find one man that had been there and had returned.
Wow.
You know, I mean, that's how isolated it was.
Yes. It's and I think the isolation aspect has to be taken into consideration. Wild places are not only by nature potentially dangerous, but they become something within our minds.
They do. And so I can see the idea of the devil, particularly if part of the origin is from mountain lions, and then you incorporate the native witchcraft lore. I can see the devil cat being a part of the Howler story.
Yes, I see that. I see that too, and I think that then you start bringing in death omens. You start bringing in, and I think that it's fair to say that there is a lumberman aspect. I'm going to come back to the concatenated hoo-hoo, just simply because I love to say the words concatenated hoo-hoo. It's just too much fun. But that I think in many cases it might be fair to say that your lumbermen, your loggers, and your lumbermen could have really served as a conduit, a communicative conduit of lore in a way that a lot of other interactive groups during the 19th century into the early 20th century did not have. A lot of your sustenance farming or sustainable farming, single family farms, etc. Who are they going to be interacting with when they took their crops to town? They would have been going to the mill. They would have been talking to local people. It would have been highly insular. If you were for example, in Greene County and interacting with market, you still would have been, for example, going in to mills, to specific locations, interacting with, again, local people who would have served as a middleman before shipping things out. Certainly down here, lots of produce was grown in Taney County and shipped out by rail, but you just take it to the railroad depot, load it on, off it goes. Something that I would conjecture is that, and we see this, for example, reference one of our topics from last week, with Leeper, that Leeper, with his, he created some of the biggest sawmills, and this was a hub, that the sawmill would have become a hub between the extraordinarily wealthy and influential, i.e. the Hoo-Hoo clan,
literally, because those were the people who formed it.
The movers and shakers of society, the individuals who would have connected with the newspapers, the magazines, the ultra wealthy, the sawmill connection and the industrial era, that post Civil War industrial revolution in the middle of America, that would have been the point of connection between them and this essentially backwoods culture, hillbilly culture, and second or third generation settler culture from the old world, sharing this point of sharing. And I can't help but conjecture a little bit that there may have been some very, very interesting cross transfers of information, of stories, of lore through that juncture point. That certainly in the Ozarks, I'm not sure if there's a lot of pathways of that outside of the sawmills.
I mean, that's true. Plus, just for even, firsthand accounts,
Yes.
the lumber crews were in the most isolated areas, and they could be, days away from anyone else. And so they often were very, if they were going to encounter something weird in the forest, they were more likely to do it than anyone else.
Which then brings
And then
up,
they would bring those tales back to the sawmill, and
and then from there. So I think there is something to the hoo-hoo, but the concatenated or otherwise. But I can't help but consider that there were rare but existent occurrences for those men in which they said, we encountered something weird, and it was more than lore. It was something else.
Exactly. And that's exactly what happened with the Blue Man. So
yes,
we know that. So I can see that as applying here as well. So I don't know, that might be a good juncture to end on.
A good place to conclude. I have a rompy puppy. He's a cushy. He's going to howl.
I think so. So people, we appreciate everyone, and please like Dark Ozarks on Facebook, YouTube, subscribe, share, click the bells, all those things. Yes. And we will be back next week talking about something else.
Absolutely. We thank you all. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Alex. Good times near the concatenated hoo-hoo.
Just like saying that.
I do. I really do.